Hello guys and gals, welcome back to another episode of Haunted Gaming. This time, we're doing a creepypasta called Attract Mode. Did you ever hear about Polybius? It was an urban legend that used to travel the World Wide Web back when it wasn't all that worldwide and consisted almost entirely of discussion boards. Basically, the idea was that this strange arcade game, Polybius, started showing up in arcades. Kids checked it out, its vector graphics and quiz sections, kind of an odd mix, and eventually anyone who played it for any length of time started suffering side effects. An inability to be sad, that one sticks in my memory the most. I'm not so sure it's just an urban legend. When I used to live in New York in the 1980s, my mom and I would make routine trips to the South Hills Mall in Dutchess County. While she went shopping, I'd get dropped off at the Dream Machine arcade. It was everything you'd imagine, loud music mingling with chimes and electronic gunfire from the 100 noisy, obnoxious arcade cabinets, all begging for your attention and your money. I was always more of a skee-ball kid. Well, I mean, I'd played video games, I had a Nintendo. Still, something about rolling a ball for a promised reward for that boombox, 10,000 tickets by the way, a radio-controlled car, 25,000 tickets by the way, always pulled me to that row of miniature bowling alleys. I wasn't really good at it, though I rarely rolled zeros. The last time I went to a Dream Machine, a friend of mine from school had come along for the trip, Nicholas. He and I shared a lot of common interests, though we didn't realize every kid our age did. Popular cartoons, toys, and yes, games. We'd met when I first came to that school. He greeted me on the playground with a hearty pat on the back and, how you doing? Soon after, I found out he had a bunch of wild berries from the school grounds in his hands. My parents made his parents pay for the shirt after the stain wouldn't come out. It had been brand new, you know, so I'd make a good impression and all. So yeah, Nicholas was kind of a dick. I don't even know how we became friends, but eventually it happened. So as we went to the arcade together, he turned to me and held out his hand. What? I studied his open palm. Quarters. Your mom said you're supposed to share. She had given me a handful in the car, but I hadn't heard her say that. Still, I figured he wouldn't lie about something like that, so I handed over half. With that, he was gone, into the crowd of strange kids I don't know. As you already figured out, we weren't supposed to share. Looking back, I figure his parents thought that if they had to pay for my shirt, why should he have to pay for games when we were the ones that had taken him out? Seems like a hell of a thing to tell your kid. To lie if he wanted any coins, but hey, I don't know. Playing a game was 25 cents, if you can believe it. Theoretically, if you had some serious mojo, you could beat an entire game or rack up skee-ball tickets for a single coin. 50-cent games were the really fantastic ones, but I ignored them out of principle. So I rolled and I collected tickets game after game. When I was almost finished, sooner than I should, since I was going down half my gaming allowance, these other two kids approached. Yo, can I get a roll? The larger of the two kids asked. He was still smaller than me, but he was at least a head taller than the other kid who was following. I didn't want to say yes, but I did. Sure. He rolled one ball up the track. My brother too? The bigger little kid gestured to the smaller little kid. It was a way of saying, hey, it's only fair to include him. Okay, the kid rolls two. One more. The bigger little kid doesn't even wait for me to agree before he rolls another. His little brother doesn't even ask before he does the same. And that was it. I had no more rolls and no more quarters. I went to collect a string of tickets, but the big brother beat me to it. Hey, I rolled some of these, but it was my quarter. He pulled off a couple tickets and they both disappeared into the crowd, dropping the rest on the floor for me to scoop up. Needless to say, I was getting very angry, very sad. There's nothing quite like being alone in the crowd, you know. I tried to find Nicholas, but had no luck. Either he was walking around the arcade too and I kept missing him, or he just left the arcade and went to buy ice cream with the quarters I'd shared with him. I don't know how I even managed to hear it over the din. Please press start, please press start. It was a loop of the same sing-song phrase, uttered by some deep mechanical voice that sounded like Darth Vader or Worf or some sort of sci-fi tough guy. I found the source of the voice. I saw it belonged to a jet black arcade cabinet in the back corner of the place, right by the door that said, office. The sides of the cabinets, or at least the ones I could see since it wasn't against a wall, displayed a typical overdone airbrush-like painting. It was a kid like me, but dressed in some sort of Ute scout outfit. His clothes were torn, and he had a look of resolve on his face. He held a crossbow as strange alien skeletons swarmed from tombstones behind him. The name above the machine blinding, strobing screen read, Skull and Crossbow. I focused on the screen. It was black, like the cabinet, except for the source of the brilliant flashes. It was the same phrase that the machine kept spouting, its heavy bass pulsing through me in waves. Please press start. Please press start. Please press start. I watched it for a few seconds, then looked around. Someone, somewhere, had put a quarter in and left. Or they had gotten a free game and didn't know it. This wasn't the first time I'd seen this happen, and I always dreaded it would happen to me, that I'd missed the free game I'd earned. Nobody was around. The voice from the machine, seemingly frustrated, became more insistent as if time was running out. Please press start, please press start, please press start. I lined myself up in front of the controls, a simple joystick and a couple red buttons, and I pressed start. Instantly, an elongated, pointy-headed skull filled the screen, its hollow eyes staring directly at my face. It was the briefest moment, and my mind barely registered it, but it was there. The game shocked me with another heavy bass exclamation as the screen went completely black as quickly as the skull had appeared. Fool! I thought about stopping right then. There was no short supply of gory, monster-themed games in the arcade, and I'd never chosen to play any of them. I'd seen one called Chiller that made you shoot people and objects just to torture them. It was filled with blood and violence and torture. I had nightmares about it on and off for weeks after I'd seen it, and I was only watching someone else play it. I couldn't leave because I was surrounded by a half circle of other kids who were laughing and cheering every vomit-inducing scene. In the end, however, the need to make sure the game wasn't wasted overruled my fears about its content. First phase. The words I saw on the screen seemed odd. The only time I'd heard phase was on Star Trek, phaser or whatever that meant. Before I could think about it too much, I was under attack. On screen, that is, my character, the aforementioned Youth Scout, was at the bottom of the screen. At the top, the sprite of an elongated, pointy skull, followed by a series of ribcage. The first ribcage had skeletal arms, and at the end of this bone monstrosity was a pelvis with skeletal legs. Relief washed over me. It was a sequel or a clone of Centipede, and I'd played that game hundreds of times on my cousin's old Atari. He'd given it to me as soon as he noticed girls. The setting was a graveyard. Tombstones blocked my arrows, but would crumble with each hit. There were also several open graves that didn't seem to do anything. They certainly didn't stop or slow the crazy skeleton that was turning and hurrying downwards. Each arrow fired gave a satisfying thrum of the bowstring and made a nice crack when it hit a stone. However, when the big skeleton was hit, it would make this awful screech. The sound was distorted by the speakers or something. It was amped up too loud and it had too high a pitch to be smoothly projected. It sounded like a cassette tape being eaten by the player, this drawn out and shrill "Ah!" I fired arrows willy-nilly, just getting a feel for the controls and such. Since it seemed to be the first level, or at least an early one, I dispatched the skeletal thing with relative ease. The screen went black again, with these words in white. OAD is fighting mad now. OAD? Must be that skeleton thing. OAD? Like Toad or Odor? Seemed fitting. Second phase. I was very ready for it to increase in difficulty. This was only to be expected. As I thought, OAD moved faster now, whipping his head around and following with his snake-like body, in rapid order. Every time I blew off his head, I would just move back and replace one of the rib cages. If I blew off any other part of him, he'd grow shorter at the end. So it seemed like targeting his head was a good idea, because it essentially set him back a bit, while shortening his rear end did little good. I fired rapidly, took out the head when I could, and the rest of him when I didn't have that prime opportunity. Then OAD did something weird. He stopped, just froze and let me pick off his ribs. He opened his jaws and coughed up a bone with one sharpened end pointed right at my character. It descended so quickly that I could barely move out of the way in time. The worst part was when that bone spear was belched forth with the most disturbing sound yet, this puke-like wah that made me feel sick to my stomach. The heavy bass of this game didn't help, thrusting the gross audio straight into the core of my body. It was a bit harder to beat this level, as you'd assume with any Phase 2. Still, I was triumphant in spite of how close OAD had come to the bottom of the screen, which surely meant a loss. The screen went black. Watch your step. Third phase. The game started again, and nothing seemed different. OAD didn't move any faster, and while he still barfed the occasional spear, it wasn't shaping up to be very difficult. I'd say I had about half of his twisted, grim little body gone before anything changed. Then out of the open graves, Little skeletons crawled out periodically and continued to crawl through the graveyard, all the way to the bottom in a straight line. I specifically remember that the skeletons were generally the same size, but had small variations in height and the like. Some had little bits of rotten clothes, while others were missing limbs or even heads. No two were alike, which seemed very ambitious for an arcade game at the time, and it was common to battle hundreds of identical thugs. Between watching OAD, keeping track of the crawlers, and avoiding the damn bone spears OAD endlessly spewed at me, I was overwhelmed. One of the crawlers touched the sprite I mean, and I was dead. He was dead. My heart sank. But it always did whenever I lost a game like this. It was nothing to get that upset over. But you know how that feels. Life 2 of 3. That screen drew me back in again, informing me that I only lost 1 of 3 lives a quarter had paid for. I didn't know why it had slipped my mind that games rarely ended after one try, but I completely bought into the idea that if the character died, that was it. Death was final. At least that's how I'd been thinking. I barely got my hands back on the control before the round started over again. This time I focused on killing the crawlers. The second their little heads poked out over the soil, destroying OAD's body took a back seat. The second I saw a crawler stirring. Fire, 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 crawler, take it out, fire, 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 fire. I was getting into the groove of it now, and all I heard was the sound of the machine, the music that filled the place, all the clicks and hoots of all the other games. That was all gone, and all I remember hearing was a strange, off-kilter music of skull and crossbow. Every thrum, every thwack, every shriek of the villain filled my ears. I wanted to hear his speaker rattling death scream forever. Die, OAD, die, and die, and die, and die, and keep dying. I hate you. I want to beat your game. I want you to cry about it because you're disgusting. I don't like you either. My heart raced. My jaw dropped. I'd beaten the level, and that was the message to greet me? In a childlike way, I reasoned that it couldn't have been specifically saying that to me, because I'd only thought how much I hated OAD. I hadn't said anything, so it clearly couldn't have heard me. It was all in my head. Final phase. This was it. The final level. It seemed odd that the game was so short, but there you are. Nicholas called out to me, as if I had been hiding instead of searching the whole place for him. He was carrying a shopping bag from a comic store. Not now, I snapped. What are you playing, Skull and Crossbow? He said that the game's name as if it were an insult. The same way a kid would say, you play Barbies? Shh! What, is it good? Stop it, I'm on the last level, be quiet! Nicholas came up next to me, stared into the screen and started to push me out of the way. Hey, hey, I screamed as loud as I could. Come on, give me a turn. No! I mustered everything within me and boomed out the most threatening sound I could manage. No! Nicholas stepped away. Fine, baby. I didn't reply. I was busy killing OAD and his family. Baby, he repeated. Fine, baby. He wasn't getting a response from me. Not now. Not when I was so close to winning this game. I'd never actually beaten an arcade game before, and never would after. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground. Nicholas had shoved me. I didn't even know what was happening until I was on the rock-hard red carpet, old soda and grime stuck to my arms as I lay sideways on the floor. My character, died again. Without me there to guide that little scout and tell him where to fire, he just stood there, frozen, and OAD slithered down, bones rattling, claws clacking. The game made an awful sound, the perfect likeness of a little boy screaming as he was slowly eaten alive. The tearing of flesh, the spurting of blood, the gurgle from the boy's throat as he couldn't scream anymore, it was all there. Cool! Nicholas took my place at the controls as I rolled over and got to my feet. Stop it right now, I screamed. Drop dead, Nicholas replied coolly. It's my turn now. I tried to push him away from the game, shove him down like he'd done to me. But, I was weak. My hands were shaking, my head and eyes were so hot, and I could barely stand, much less force an able-bodied kid out of that space. Nicholas jerked the controls, mashed the buttons hard with his palm. He didn't even know how to play it at all, wasn't in the swing of it, and he was starting on the hardest level. Die, 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 he chanted excitedly. This is cool. I'm playing it out. You can get next. I don't have any quarters, I whined. Now, basically crumpled in a heap and grasping at his knee as if I could pull it from under him. Oh darn, he kept playing. Eyes on the screen. I started to build up my strength to attempt one final lunge at my former friend, but before I could get to that point, the sound was projected from the cabinet once again. A scream. Eating. A gurgle of air bubbling through blood. Game over. Ha, 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 ha. The game sounded pretty happy about it. Oh well, that was too hard. This game sucks. Nicholas didn't get it. OAD needed to die, and I was just about to kill him. He walked around the arcade cabinet and peered into the half-inch of space between the back of the machine and the wall. Then he tried to move it. What are you doing? I was on my feet again, barely, after the last thing I wanted at this point was this idiot to get us in trouble. If you unplug these, Nicholas tried to squeeze his hand behind the machine, but it wouldn't fit. They give you free games sometimes. I was on board now, anything to finish what I'd started. Without a second thought, I was beside Nicholas, trying to pull the cabinet away from the wall just enough to find the plug and remove it. The two of us jolted and rocked the heavy machine until we slid it away from the wall a couple feet. Nicholas looked behind the machine and again froze. What? I was getting frustrated. I want another free game. Help? Nicholas stammered. I stormed over close to him and looked over his shoulder. The arcade cabinet, the skull and crossbow game, it had no back. There was just an open space, into infinite darkness. There, at the threshold of this impossible void, was the elongated skull, the rib case, his skeletal arms and taloned hands. Here lived OAD. Behind him, an endless string of ribs and vertebrae led in a spiral into absolute darkness. It seized Nicholas in its hands. He let out a soft cry, a whimper, and it retracted into the darkness with him. The cabinet, of its own volition, slammed back against the wall like a door caught by the wind. Slowly, unthinking, I backed away. After a moment of complete silence, the echoing din of the arcade returned to me. I could hear it all, the music, the games, the other kids, and I heard Skull and Crossbow once again singing its song. Please press start. Please press start. Please press start. Please press start. When I stopped staring at the back of the machine, because my eyes burned, and not due to any regaining of sense, I turned my gaze to the screen where OAD rested at the top of the empty graveyard. I swear he had an extra set of ribs. Well, that was a track mode, and I'm glad this was requested. I personally really enjoyed this creepypasta. Now, it's a shotgunning creepypasta. I usually refer to them as mindfucks, but whatever. As far as cliches go, to be honest, I really didn't notice them, and as I read this initially, and to be honest, at least to me, it wouldn't really kill the vibe at all. That being said, the events of this creepypasta were definitely a breath of fresh air compared to the other creepypastas we've done. Instead of really focusing on a nostalgic game the player has a hard-on for on a dedicated console, it focuses on an old arcade cabinet in an arcade decades ago. Basically Polybius, hell, even referencing that at the beginning. And to be honest, I liked the connection. I felt as though it was used effectively. Now, the whole creepypasta, I was relating this to Polybius in my head, a lone arcade cabinet all the way at the back, although not as attractive it seemed, whereas Polybius was a very attractive game by the masses. The game seemed to have this addictive-like personality to the player, drawing the player in, making the player want to go finish what they started, wanting to keep playing this game, and even developing some aggression, sort of like the side effects. It felt like the game was truly affecting the player, much like Polybius did to its victims. Now, as much as I liked the mood, minus some of the cheesy dialogue, I wish this creepypasta would have ended on a rather ominous note, with it showing a darker protagonist in the end, the game slowly but surely changing the player for the worse, ultimately making the player snap upon its disappearance, really push that Polybius relation to its extent. But alas, the creepypasta turned into a murderous cabinet that devoured the player upon loss, and I guess an attempt to jack free games and implant them into the game. Maybe punishment, maybe those skeletons were players themselves fallen and taken alive by this game. Maybe these are the records those black-suited men were gathering. I don't know, what do you think? Now, again, I did also like the player had these, they actually developed the characters, had a backstory, it felt fleshed out. See, a lot of creepypastas don't do this, but I like the build-up. I definitely think that is one of the big things in a creepypasta. I like the build-up, I like that you could really sort of feel invested in these characters, and they actually had, some dimension. And ultimately, in the end, you sort of really did see the change, and that's obviously something that's really awesome, and I like that in a creepypasta. But moving on, I just wish the ending was a little different, and I wish it didn't really resort to a devouring arcade cabinet route, since maybe it would have been believable, to be honest. A nice creepy tale of an individual experience with a weird arcade cabinet. Maybe, but that's what I thought about it. That's just my opinion. What would you rate this creepypasta, and what would you change to make it better? This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming, and if you like what you saw, then like, comment, and subscribe. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.